This wealthy Texas housewife hit and killed a man with a speeding Porsche as she had a blood alcohol level nearly 4 times the legal limit. But she tried to argue that her designer shoes were to blame. Her case just ended in a shocking verdict with a shocking sentence. Not only that, the newest twist is she unveiled to the jury she's pregnant. We're on the case, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. Before we start this episode of On the Case, let's talk about our partner and sponsor, Morgan & Morgan, America's largest injury law firm. They have more than 1,000 attorneys who have recovered more than $25 billion for their more than 500,000 clients. In the past few months alone, a client in Florida received $12 million after the insurance offered just $350,000. In Pennsylvania, another client was awarded $26 million. That is 40 times the insurer's offer. Morgan & Morgan makes it easy to fight for what you deserve. You can even start a claim on your phone. So if you've been injured, start a claim at www.forthepeople.com/OTC. You can also click the link below or scan the QR code on your screen. Kristina Chambers tried to use a pretty unique defense in a case where prosecutors had her blood alcohol level and video showing her driving a speeding Porsche that hit a man and sent him flying 30 feet into the air. Before I get to the verdict and the sentence for Kristina Chambers, let me break down how we got to this point in this story. Chambers was unemployed, but married to a hedge fund manager. She didn't work, but you could say she didn't have to work. And it seemed that she lived a high life, and apparently a reckless life, up until April 19th, 2023. On that night in Houston, Chambers went out with friends in her new $100,000 sports car. Her husband had bought it for her. Now, the group had some dinner, they had some drinks. Prosecutors said that Chambers, the driver, had at least 6 drinks before she got behind the wheel of that sports car. Chambers and her friends decided it was time to head home around 2:35 in the morning. So they packed into that Porsche, and apparently on the way home, Chambers decided she wanted to show her friends what this car could do on the open road. At that same time, 33-year-old Nicholas McMullin was taking a chance on a first date. He was also calling it an evening, and he and his date decided they wanted a snack before they head home. So they went to a donut shop. With donuts and coffee in hand, McMullin and his date were walking back to their cars when it happened. This is video that was shown in court per KHOU. It does not show the moment of impact, but it does show a Porsche allegedly going more than 70 miles per hour, plowing into McMullin, and it sent him flying 30 feet into the air. Now, according to the Houston Chronicle, the woman he was on a date with says all of this happened so fast that when she turned to warn McMullin to get out of the way, he was already gone. She remembers feeling something brush up against her hip. That's it. The 33-year-old lover of music was pronounced dead on scene. The driver of that Porsche, of course, was Kristina Chambers. She was arrested an hour after the crash, and the Chronicle reports that medical records show that her blood alcohol level was about 4 times the legal limit, even an hour after all of this happened. Prosecutors also say they searched the Porsche, and they found little baggies of cocaine in the vehicle. Kristina would test positive for cocaine, but claimed it was not from that night, but from using it a few nights prior. Chambers was arrested and charged with manslaughter. She was granted a $50,000 bond a week after her arrest, and she was free up until her trial. Now, days after her bond was set, her husband, the hedge fund manager, filed for divorce. Now, that divorce was finalized in February of 2024, but the two didn't separate, it seems, completely based off Chambers now being pregnant. I'll have more on that in a moment. The prosecution has witnesses to this horrific crash. They had the woman who was on a date with McMullin when he was hit. They also have the medical records allegedly showing that Chambers was drunk at the time of the crash. So the big question would be, what is her defense? Well, Chambers argued that it actually wasn't the driving or the drinking that was to blame, but the designer shoes she had on her feet. She was wearing some Louboutin shoes. Those are the ones with the red bottoms. They can go for thousands of dollars. Her defense attorney argued that her heel got stuck in the gas pedal of the Porsche, and that sent the vehicle flying into McMullin. Not only that, her attorney also claimed that this crash happened on one of Houston's most dangerous curbs, where there have been several bad crashes in the city in the past. The jury didn't buy Chambers' shoe-blaming argument. They found her guilty of manslaughter, and that's a charge in Texas that can carry between 2 and 20 years in prison. And this week, in the sentencing phase, a jury deliberated for 6 hours, and they sentenced Kristina Chambers to 11 years and 14 days in prison. That's a nod to her victim's birthday. Nicholas McMullin was born on November 14th. Then there was another twist in this story, and it came during the sentencing portion. Chambers confirmed she is 4 months pregnant. She said she didn't get pregnant on purpose to try and impact the trial or the sentencing phase, but she has been facing this charge since 2023. The father of the baby is the husband who divorced her shortly after the crash. And now it appears that that baby will be born in prison as she serves her time. The legal proceedings surrounding this case aren't over. McMullin's family has also filed a civil suit that is slated to go on trial in the spring of next year. Not only does that lawsuit blame Chambers for the crash, but also her ex-husband, who prosecutors argued bought her that Porsche. Chambers' defense attorney says that the husband had actually bought her the car because they were trying to work through some marital issues. McMullin's family wants more than $1 million in the case, which will be decided by a jury in civil court. Joining us now from Texas to talk more about this case is Bridget Williams, trial attorney and former prosecutor. Thank you for being with us. This is a really sad case when you think of this young man who was just out on a first date and everything that happened. And now the woman responsible, Kristina Chambers, she's been sentenced to 11 years and 14 days. It could have been between 2 and 20 years was the range. What do you make of the jury coming back with this punishment?
I think that the range, like you said, is between 2 to 20 years on this intoxication manslaughter case. Them coming up with this in-between number, I think, is appropriate. It probably is something that took them a long time to do to come up with that particular number, and then made that decision based off his birth date. I think that was something that was appropriate for this particular case. The range of punishment at 2 years or even probation, sometimes individuals may get probation, that happens sometimes, or a person could get up to 20 years. So I think that them finding somewhere in the middle was appropriate.
How common is it that someone's sentence has this kind of symbolic meaning to it? He was born on November 14th, so she'll be serving 11 years and 14 days as her sentence.
It's common whenever you go to a jury, generally for punishment, because I mean that's not something that in most people of the public are doing all the time. They're not sitting on juries. They're not trying to figure out how long should a person be in prison. So whenever you go to a jury for punishment, they're trying to find something that may be symbolic to the victim or the victim's family normally. But if you go to a judge, generally they probably have like set numbers normally in place based off of different factors of the case.
Kristina Chambers, and this wasn't allowed to be mentioned during the trial portion, but she's 4 months pregnant. This crash happened in 2023, so since she's been out on bond, she has been pregnant, and it's reasonable to think that this baby will be born in the Texas Department of Corrections. She said that she did not get pregnant on purpose. How does someone being pregnant in her type of situation factor into what her punishment could be?
Well, it could be something that could be brought up not in the guilt innocence phase, but just in the punishment factors. If it's brought up to the jury, just for them to consider it in mitigating circumstances, and so that's just something that the jury could take into consideration while they're trying to determine how many years that she should receive for punishment. So that's something that could be determined then. However, it's not something that they have to consider. It's not something that they must do. They just can if they choose to.
Her attorney had requested probation for this. What goes into, as if she had been given probation, I think it's reasonable to think that there would have been some frustration and outrage from people in the community when you see what she was convicted of. I mean, for as drunk as she was and to take the life of this young man, even if she didn't mean to do it, but it happened. What goes into, for the defense attorney, deciding what they're going to come in with and request of the judge that would be reasonable? What's the strategy behind that?
Every case is a case-by-case basis. If this were my client, we would talk about she hasn't had any priors ever. So we start off there. She hasn't had any criminal history ever. This was just a one-time thing. She was out with friends, and she can be rehabilitated. She can go to some type of classes. She can go to treatment. Maybe even in some circumstances, we have outpatient therapy. Sometimes there's inpatient therapy. There's so many different choices, options that are available for probation that a defense attorney can request for the judge to give to a client. And it's up to the judge to determine if that's a yes or a no. After having that conversation with the state, if they still say no, then they generally will move forward to a trial setting.
As far as her pregnancy, and if she's incarcerated at the time that she gives birth, like, how does that work? I mean, is there, she'll receive medical care in prison and then give birth to this baby, who then I assume would be given to a family member on the outside?
That's exactly correct. She would be in the care of the state of Texas and get the medical treatment that any other individual would receive that is in the custody of the state. And then once she gives birth, the child will be given to more than likely the father, or if the father is unknown, then to another family member or into some type of child custody services.
And you just think of what that experience will be like. I know she was legally divorced from her husband, who filed for divorce shortly after the crash in 2023, but he is the father of this baby, and they're almost halfway through that pregnancy. As far as her defense, and this got a lot of attention because she was frankly drunk with what her toxicology showed. There were some drugs found in the car. She says she wasn't using those drugs at the time, and she was flooring it in this Porsche. And her defense attorney argued that she was wearing these designer shoes. They got hooked on the gas pedal, and that is what caused the crash. What did you make of that defense?
So the thing is, intoxication manslaughter, there's like two prongs with that, right? So the first thing is that the state has to prove that the person was intoxicated. And so we've already crossed that threshold. Intoxication is above 0.08, or they have lost the normal use of their mental or physical faculties. She's 3 times the legal limit, so we don't even have to get to the second prongs. So she's above 0.08. Okay. The next step there is, did that intoxication cause the death of another by accident or mistake? So she could have been intoxicated, but if that intoxication did not cause the death of the other, then that technically makes her not guilty. So that's why he uses this defense to say, well, it was her shoes. It wasn't necessarily her intoxication. He's not saying that she wasn't intoxicated. He was just saying that the intoxication didn't cause the death of the other person. And so I think that it's a creative defense. However, the jury just didn't believe it, right? And so they can only do so much in this particular situation. And so I think that that's the reasoning behind what he did.
I know just reading some of the reports from court that she, gave an impact statement and had apologized to the McMullin family for what happened and said, if she could switch places, she would. How often do those statements showing the remorse, even though she apparently maintains that it was the heel that caused it, how could that factor into the jury's decision on what her punishment would be?
Those type of statements are going to be extremely impactful because what normally is happening, the person is just pleading and just begging really for like a forgiveness and showing their remorse towards the jury. They're showing it towards the victim's family and just pretty much just showing that this was an accident. This was a mistake. I didn't mean to do it. However, based off all the factors that were presented in this case, it's more of so like a reckless behavior that happened here, right? So it can go into account. They don't have to consider it. They can if they choose to, but it's not a must that they must consider her statement in saying, okay, well, we will now reduce your punishment down to probation. They don't have to do it. It's just something that the defense counsel can try to use to try to attempt to reduce the punishment factor going into that stage.
We've seen a lot of cases that judges are the ones who make the decision after a conviction of what someone's punishment is going to be. In this case, it was a jury. They deliberated for 6 hours on what her punishment was going to be. What goes into whether it's going to be a judge making the decision or a jury?
That's completely up to the defense counsel if they want to go to the judge or the jury for punishment phase. A lot of times when you have something that is highly emotion based, a case like that, I normally would go to a judge for punishment because, like we talked about earlier, the jury is made of just individuals in our random public, right, who are sitting on this jury, and they're very emotion based when it comes to giving out a punishment. We just talked about they gave the punishment for the victim's birthday. And so if there is something that is highly emotion based, a lot of times we're going to go to a judge. Or if we know that the judge gives out specific sentences for specific offenses every time, then we go to the judge for that. Or if we know that the judge gives out different sentences based off how they feel that day, then maybe we go to a jury. It just really depends. It's a case-by-case basis.
There's a civil suit that the family of the victims filed against Chambers, and it'll go on trial in the spring. Now that she's been convicted, how does that impact how that civil proceeding could go on?
So in a wrongful death case, they are trying to get the insurance of the person who was at fault. So against Chambers, so her car insurance. And so they're filing a wrongful death case against her car insurance. And so the criminal case, because it's a conviction now, can be brought into evidence in the civil case. And so what that normally happens when you have a conviction for a driving while intoxicated, just driving while intoxicated alone can increase the damages to what we call gross negligence in a civil matter. And that just means that you could ask for 3 times the economic damages now. And so it can extremely impact the civil case where they can ask for additional damages.
And the husband, her ex-husband, legally ex-husband, but again, the father of her expectant child, he is being sued by the family as well because he's the one who reportedly bought the Porsche that she was driving the night that all of this happened. How strong of an argument is it that he bought the car for his wife, and obviously he's the one who has the money, she was unemployed at the time. How strong of an argument is that he's responsible for this happening?
I think that's a bit of a stretch, but of course they're going to include him because, like you just stated, he's the one with the money. So because most of the time, whenever we file a wrongful death case or any type of personal injury case against a vehicle, their car insurance, it only comes in increments of $30,000, $50,000, $100,000, unless it's a commercial policy. This is not a commercial policy. This is just a basic vehicle insurance policy. And so when that happens, they're going to be looking for additional money to go after. And so if he's the one with the money, then they're going to try their very best to include him in the lawsuit. However, the civil court judge is the one who will make the determination on if they're reaching or not, or if there's enough evidence to say, well, yes, he can be attached to this particular case. And so I think that they're going to do everything in their power to try to make sure that he stays included in that.
He divorced her shortly after this happened in 2023. Does that provide any protection from him, for him, like legally, in terms of whether they could go at him, or does that have any impact on these proceedings?
No. So the fact of the matter is, did he buy the Porsche? What is his connection to the day in question of what happened? On that day, was he the owner of the Porsche? Was it in his name? Did he provide it to her? Did he have knowledge that she, drank often? Did he have knowledge that she did drugs? Did he have knowledge of all these things? So him divorcing her at a later time, that doesn't necessarily have any impact on that.
So she'll head to prison now, 11 years and 14 days. How likely is it that she'll serve the full 11 years and 14 days in prison?
It just depends. A lot of times, I know that this is an older case. We don't know how many days she stayed in jail before she bonded out. The court will give that person time served for the amount of days that they were in jail already. So they'll start there. And then if she goes to jail, she has good behavior, things like that. She can be up for parole early. There's different factors there. A lot of times most people do not serve day for day.
And then one question I forgot to ask, just as far as the bar of what will need to be proved in the wrongful death suit, what is it that specifically the family will have to prove to find Chambers guilty or liable, for the death of Nicholas McMullin?
So the difference between the civil case and the criminal case, in the criminal case, we talk about the intent, right? We talk about, do we meet these particular factors? In the civil matter, we talk about negligence. And so this was an accident. We didn't mean for it to happen. It happened. And that's the reason why we have insurance, right? So insurance comes in place whenever something happens that we didn't intend to happen. It was an accident. It was a mistake. And so they have to show that it was her driving that caused the death or caused injury to this other person. It was an accident. And so the threshold isn't very high. Liability probably is already accepted. And so I think that the civil case isn't necessarily about liability. It's now about damages.
And we'll see how this plays out moving forward. Very sad case all around. This young man was just out on a first date, and just like that, lives are lost and lives are changed. Bridget Williams, trial attorney, former prosecutor, thank you for taking the time to be with us on Law&Crime. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law&Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.